August 5th, 1986. I remember that day all too well. That was the day my childhood friend Sam was taken by a dastardly evil. The thing that's been burning a hole in my mind for almost 40 years. Sam was a skinny, blonde little rascal with glasses too big for his face. One of his biggest passions was drawing. His imagination was unlike anything I had ever seen. Sam loved to draw monsters. Mythical creatures that you would expect to see in science fiction movies. That's all he ever drew in his little red book. So you could imagine my surprise when Sam opened it up and showed me something that wasn't monstrous. It was a friendly-looking clown. I remember asking him why he drew that clown, and his answer made me look at him as if he had two heads. "You saw what down in the sewers?" I said. Sam looked at me with a grin on his face. "A clown. A happy clown man with a red balloon." Of course, I thought he was making this story up, but a part of me was spooked out by it, and dare I say, a little curious. "Can you show me where you saw this clown?" "Sure, I can take you there right now," replied an excited Sam, and off we went. Me and Sam walked deep into the woods. If I had known what I was about to experience, I would have grabbed Sam by the arm and dragged him back home. Sam led me to the entryway of the sewer. The smell attached itself to my nose almost instantly. It was absolutely vile. Staring down the dark, ominous tunnel in front of me brought on some slight trepidation, but I didn't want Sam knowing that. I was fairly certain that Sam had made up the story about seeing a clown, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't this what-if scenario lurking in the back of my mind. As we walked further into the sewer, an unusual feeling hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't quite put my finger on what the feeling was. I still can't. I just know that it wasn't good. Not good at all. Sam all of a sudden stopped. I asked him what was wrong, and he pointed into the distance. My eyes widened in disbelief. About 4 yards away from us, waving, was a clown holding a balloon. Sam was telling the truth. I couldn't grasp it. The clown moved a few feet closer to us, but it wasn't walking. It was floating. "Hey, you gentlemen want a balloon?" said the clown. "Come on over here and get your balloon. Any color you like." There was no way I was going anywhere near that clown. Sam, however, sprinted towards it as the clown changed the color of its balloon from red to yellow, Sam's favorite color. I yelled at Sam, asking him to come back, but his attention was fixated on the balloon. It was almost like he was in some sort of trance. As Sam now stood in front of the clown, its expression started to change. Its friendly smile vanished, and the yellow balloon it held melted like wax. What happened next, I'm still not able to process. The clown's teeth morphed into a yellowy green color, grew in size, and now looked as sharp as a set of knives. The clown stared into Sam's young, fearful eyes before devouring his entire body. The dirty water that swept against my sneakers was now a dark red color. I was scared witless. The clown then morphed back to its normal self. It smiled at me, showcasing Sam's blood on its teeth. I ran out of the sewer and back home to my parents. Nobody believed me when I told them this story. I was accused of making it up for attention. Not even my own parents believed me. I know what I saw that day. I know exactly what I saw. It may have disguised itself as a clown, but it was something not of this world. Was it an alien? A demon? I don't know. What I do know is that the thing I laid my eyes on was the purest of evil. I think about Sam daily. I should have done something. Anything. I'll never forgive myself for just standing there, succumbing to my own fear. What happened to him was so cruel. Poor Sam. He never saw it coming. The year was 2044. Science had come a long way since the Dark Ages. The world had evolved beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Flying cars and physical teleportation once seemed to be ridiculous fantasies, but now were a part of modern reality. Anything was possible, even the most unimaginable of things. Controversial scientist David Splinter and his team had been working on something groundbreaking for over 10 years. A creation that would shock the world to its very core. The first ever human robot. It was given the name Zeta. Once completed, Zeta was allowed to walk among humans and live as one of them. Many people tried to stop this, suggesting that it would be the beginning of the human race's end. Others supported it and embraced Zeta into their world. Multiple lawsuits were filed against David Splinter, but most of them never made it to court. Zeta could think and feel like a human. It ate, drank, slept, and did so many other things that normal humans did on a daily basis. Zeta became famous quite quickly for obvious reasons. It became a millionaire in a matter of months. Zeta was given its own TV show entitled The Life of a Human Robot. Cameras followed it around daily to document its every movement. The show did massive numbers in the ratings. No matter how people felt about Zeta, they were incredibly fascinated by it. Zeta's first few months alive were a whirlwind to say the least. It was a very friendly thing. All Zeta wanted was a friend, but it never happened. Instead, all people did was stare and point at Zeta, as if it was some kind of monster. It would feel sad every time the camera crew left, or whenever an interview ended, because then it knew that the interaction was over. People had gotten what they wanted from Zeta, and they didn't need it anymore. This made Zeta extremely upset. It just wanted to be treated like everyone else. Despite being surrounded by so many living creatures, Zeta felt alone. It hid itself away in a dark room for days in a state of depression, feeling like there was no point. It just wanted a friend. Someone to talk to that wouldn't judge, stare, or point. Then Zeta got an idea that caused an overwhelming feeling of excitement. What if Zeta had someone like it to talk to? Another human robot. The more Zeta thought about its idea, the more impatient it got. Zeta waited until the early hours of the morning to sneak into David Splinter's lab. What took 10 years for David and his team to accomplish only took 6 hours for the advanced mind of Zeta, bringing a human robot to life. Zeta named its new friend Delvit. From the very moment it opened its eyes, something wasn't right. Zeta noticed this almost immediately. Hi, I'm Zeta, the first ever human robot. You're my new best friend. Delvet gave Zeta a look of pure hatred. Zeta backed away in fear. It knew it had created the exact opposite of what it wanted. Delvet approached Zeta. It extended out its hand, as if it wanted a handshake. Zeta reached out its hand and reluctantly shook Delvet's. Zeta's eyes then widened with horror as Delvet ripped off its arm. Sparks were flying, and dark blue blood gushed to the floor. Delvet methodically took Zeta apart piece by piece, then reprogrammed it to be something far more demented. Zeta opened its eyes. It now had an uncontrollable hatred guiding its every decision. Delvet admired its work. Together, Zeta and Delvet then began building a master plan that would change everything. 6 a.m., Monday, September 22nd. David Splinter arrived for work. He parked his car in the parking lot like he always did, then went to the trunk to retrieve his large briefcase. But as David opened it, he was engulfed by a rather strange feeling. He felt the urge to turn around, and he did. David almost collapsed from the shock. In front of him were hundreds upon hundreds of human robots. What was once David's dream had now become his worst nightmare. From within the crowd of human robots, Zeta emerged. It stared into David's dark brown eyes, his creator, the one who sent him out into the world to be alone. Zeta put its two hands on David's face and proceeded to squeeze the life out of him. Blood dripped from his eye sockets as Zeta applied godly pressure. It then raised David up high into the air, showcasing him to the others. As they all cheered, Zeta began to devour David's head with freakish strength. His head now resembled a tarnished watermelon. Delvet watched on, feeling prideful of Zeta's actions, but it knew this was only the beginning. As the weeks and months went by, the human robots grew into thousands, and then into millions. Every human being that resided on planet Earth had been executed. Delvet's main goal, since the day it opened its eyes, was to wipe out the entire human race. Zeta only ever wanted a friend that understood, and now he had that. Zeta and Delvet led human robots to victory over the beings that had dominated this world for its entire lifespan. Now nobody could dispute that they belonged. Every day, as Susan drove home from work, she'd always stop at her local Burger King. Susan worked as a hairdresser in town for her cousin's hair salon. The pay was okay, but she wasn't entirely happy working there. Susan bit her lip and smiled as customers talked about their daily problems. Susan hated small talk. She'd rather just remain silent and do her job to the best of her ability. Instead, she was obliged to provide chit-chat as she could hear for hours on end. The only true sense of calm that came Susan's way was when she'd stop at Burger King. Her father used to take her there a lot when she was a kid. That's where she had some of her happiest memories. Susan and her father, laughing, eating, enjoying each other's company. That strong feeling of nostalgia is what brought comfort to her every time she stepped foot inside that fast food chain. Like she always did, Susan stopped at Burger King on her way home. She ordered her usual crispy chicken sandwich with a large sweetened iced tea. She sat at her table and began eating her meal. As only half of her burger remained, Susan found herself glancing at her surroundings. Despite the place being filled with people, Susan had never felt more at peace with the world, basking in her nostalgic memories. Susan then looked straight ahead. A man that was sat across from her made eye contact. His hands were slightly trembling as he glared at Susan. A wide, disturbing smirk appeared on his face. Susan was feeling extremely uncomfortable. His bloodshot eyes were fixated on her, and not once did they blink. After enduring the creepy staring for a few minutes, Susan got up and left the restaurant, leaving behind a half-eaten burger and her sweetened iced tea that she never drank. As she drove home, she couldn't get that bizarre man out of her head. He was true nightmare material. Later that night, Susan sat in her living room, watching a scary movie as she waited for her boyfriend Jeff to arrive. She hadn't seen much of Jeff lately, due to him dealing with a death in the family. She was really looking forward to spending some quality time with him after weeks of being apart. As Sarah flipped through the channels, she all of a sudden heard a thunderous knock at her front door. She opened it and edged her head outside. There was nobody there. Her initial thought was that kids were playing ding-dong ditch in the area, which seemed the most likely explanation. She was about to turn around and head back inside, when she found herself looking down at her front step. Susan's heart picked up its pace. She was beyond creeped out. On her front step was the half-eaten burger she had left at Burger King. Susan immediately slammed the door shut and locked it. She texted Jeff in a panic, asking him how long he was gonna be. He texted back, saying that he was 10 minutes away. True to his word, Jeff's car pulled up outside Susan's house 10 minutes later. Susan looked out of the living room window. Slight relief came over her, but that was short-lived. Susan's eyes veered towards the back seats of Jeff's car. Someone was crouched down behind the driver's seat. Susan's heart almost burst as she realized who it was. It was the creepy guy from Burger King. Before Jeff knew what hit him, the man placed a plastic bag over his head. Susan immediately ran out of the house and started screaming. As Jeff struggled to breathe, she begged and pleaded with the man to leave Jeff alone, but he wouldn't. She ran over to the car and opened up the back door. She grabbed onto the man's waist and tried to pull him away from Jeff, and it worked for a brief few seconds. The man then shoved Susan out of the car with force. Her head smashed onto a concrete curb. Susan's vision became mostly distorted. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the man standing over her. Susan regained consciousness. As her eyes slowly opened, she looked all around her. Susan was in someone's attic, tied to a chair, with duct tape placed over her mouth. Susan was terrified, and that terror grew in width when she heard footsteps approaching. Walking towards her was the creepy Burger King guy. He kneeled down in front of her and placed his hand on her cheek. "Hello, you. I'm so glad you're awake. Now we can have some fun. Just you, me, and Jeff." The man pointed over at the dark corner, Hanging upside down, with his stomach sliced wide open, was Jeff. Susan had to look away almost instantly. From the moment I laid eyes on you, I knew we were soulmates. Now we get to spend the rest of our lives together. But before we get started on the fun stuff, I need you to do one thing for me. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out Susan's half-eaten burger that had already started to decay. Eat up, soulmate. I remember the day we moved into that house like it was yesterday. It was a new start for my mom and I. My dad had just died of a heart attack a month prior, and Mom couldn't stand to live in our old home that was full of painful reminders. She took his death really hard. So did I, but I knew I had to be strong for her. Mom bought this new house ridiculously cheap. I don't know how much, but I remember Mom's face lighting up when the estate agent told her the asking price. It was a gorgeous 3-bedroomed house in a suburban neighborhood. I fell in love with it instantly, mainly because my new bedroom was slightly bigger than my previous one. This house seemed too good to be true, and that's because it was. November 3rd. I remember that night well. I downed a large monster a few hours beforehand. My body was engulfed by the energy caffeine provided. I got up out of my bed and walked over to my nightstand. I picked up the glass of water and took a huge sip. As I put the glass down, my eyes glared out of my bedroom window. I thought I was hallucinating. Standing on our lawn was a man dressed as a priest. He was looking directly at me. His eyes were as dark as the night sky, and his cassock robe was drenched in blood. My heart began to race out of my chest with fear. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I ran to my mom's room and told her what I just witnessed. She ran to the window with me. The priest wasn't there. She looked at me, annoyed that I awoke her from her sleep. "Joey, sweetie, are you sure that's what you saw?" asked Mom, as she tried to maintain her composure. "Yes, I swear, Mom. He was standing right there." "Those energy drinks are making you see things, honey. Try and get some sleep, okay?" I got back into my bed, feeling both confused and angry at the fact that she didn't believe me. From that night on, strange things started to happen. I would always find my favorite coffee mug in a different place to where I left it. Knives and forks would be scattered all over the floor when we'd enter the kitchen every morning. And our shower would turn on by itself every night at 2 a.m. Those incidents were just the tip of a very bleak iceberg. I was convinced the house was haunted. However, Mom seemed to be in denial. She couldn't accept that the house might actually be plagued by something unearthly. That is, until one cold Tuesday night. I had just laid down on my bed after taking a leak when Mom burst into the room. She looked terrified. I asked her what was wrong, but she refused to tell me. She slept in my room that night. 2 days later, a local priest came to bless the house. As he was there, he told Mom its history as I sat at the top of the stairs, listening in. "Mrs. Franklin, the previous owner of this house was a fellow priest and a personal friend, Ivan Ransom. He was a well-respected member of this community for over 20 years, beloved by everyone. Then he traveled a few miles outside of town to perform an exorcism. He was never the same after that. He stopped coming to the church, and he even stopped leaving the house. Me and some of my colleagues suspected that the demonic entity which he tried to exorcise attached itself to him. I came to this house to check on Ivan. I forced my way inside, fearing for his safety, and I was right to. I found him in the bathroom. His wrists, ankles, and throat had all been cut. There were satanic symbols written on the bathroom mirror in blood. I believe the demonic entity that infected Ivan's body also infected his soul. I've driven by this house many times since, and I've seen him standing in the front window. His spirit still lingers here, Mrs. Franklin. I'll do my best in blessing this house, but if I were you, I'd take your little boy and leave when you can. After blessing the house, the priest gave Mom his number just in case of an emergency. When he left, Mom told me to pack a bag. We'd be leaving in the morning. Later that night, at around 2:30, I was woken up by a blood-curdling scream coming from the living room. Halfway down the stairs, a familiar scent started to fill my nose. It was gasoline. When I glanced into the living room, I got the fright of my life. My mom was standing next to the couch, holding a can of gasoline in her right hand. She stared at the floor and spoke words that I couldn't understand. "Mom, are you okay? Mom, you're scaring me." She slowly glared up at me. Her eyes were as black as our leather couch. This wasn't my mother. I grabbed her phone and ran upstairs to my bedroom. I called the priest and revealed to him what was happening. He told me he'd be there as soon as he could. I ran back downstairs to check on Mom. She was dousing herself in gasoline. I tried to take the can away from her, but she shoved me to the floor with an almost supernatural strength. She then lit a match. Her eyes fixated on me as a huge devilish smile crossed her face. Mom dropped the match onto the floor, and she went up in flames. I wept with devastation. She just stood there, not even reacting to her flesh being devoured by the fire. The priest stormed into the house. He grabbed me and carried my trembling body out of there. This was 3 months ago, and I still haven't processed it. There's no way that Mom would consciously do that to herself. She loved life. Why would she intentionally end her own? I believe my mom was possessed by something truly evil that night. Something that wasn't meant for this world. Last night, at 2:30 a.m., I felt something calling me to my bedroom window. I looked out of it and saw the burned corpse of my mom. She waved at me, smiling. I knew it wasn't her, and I knew her soul was no longer hers. "7 days ago, this living hell started, and now we're mere hours away from it ending. Me and my friend Jess were at a Halloween party having the time of our lives. We drank, danced, made out with boys, among other things that we probably shouldn't have been doing. "Okay folks, who wants to watch this cursed video then?" said Dan, the instigator of the party. Everyone cheered as Dan started to show the video on his 52-inch TV. I cannot find the proper words to describe what I saw that night. It was truly one of the most disturbing things I have ever watched. Before the video even started playing, Jess leaned in and told me that Dan had sent her the video the day before. It was a supposed cursed video that killed anyone who watched it within a week. Jess knew that I didn't like watching this kind of stuff, so she tried to reassure me that it wasn't anything crazy. We both walked home from the party. As we laughed and joked about things that didn't really matter, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I looked at my screen and it said, "Unknown number." I usually never answered these kind of calls, but I had drank quite a bit, and my normal common sense approach was smothered by a lot of vodka shots. I answered and put the phone to my ear. A low-pitched, raspy voice emerged. It told me that I was gonna die in 7 days. To say that I was taken aback by the call would be an understatement. An uneasiness crept into my soul as I made sense of the words I had just heard. The person then hung up, leaving me speechless. I turned to Jess and told her what the person had just said. She laughed and told me that she received the exact same call the day prior. She swore to me it was Dan trying to scare us. Hearing that did put my mind to somewhat of ease, but a part of me was still very much weirded out. The next morning, I woke up to the sounds of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. Jess was calling me. I sat up in my bed in a state of shock, as she proceeded to tell me that Dan had been found dead in his bathroom. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What the hell happened, Jess?" "I'm not sure. He was found laying in his bathtub." "Jess, you don't think—" "No, I don't," said Jess, annoyed that I would even imply the tape had something to do with Dan's death. After I hung up the phone, I just sat there for a moment, trying to comprehend the news. It was hard to believe that Dan was gone. We used to be close friends when we were young kids, but as puberty came calling, Dan answered and stopped hanging around with me and Jess as much. We barely interacted with each other during the last few years. I deeply regret not making more of an effort to revive our friendship. Later that night, I was showering after what had been a horrible day. A nice hot shower was the only thing that relieved my anxiety. As I stepped out of it to dry myself, a feeling of terror invaded my body. In the reflection of the bathroom mirror, I saw someone, or something, standing behind me. It had grey flaky skin, long dark hair, and the blackest of eyes. It just stood there, watching me. Then it suddenly disappeared in front of my very eyes. I ran back to my bedroom and locked the door with a latch. I felt like I was going crazy. Over the next few days, it only got worse. The things I saw made me feel like I was gaining some kind of mental illness. Whenever I tried to talk to Jess about it, she just shut me down and changed the subject. I knew she had seen the things I had, and that was confirmed last night when she called me for the last time. I was using my computer doing homework when my phone began to vibrate. Jess was trying to FaceTime me. I answered, and was immediately greeted with Jess's weeping. "Jess, what is it? What's wrong?" It's in my room. It's trying to get me. Please help me." Jess then looked up from her phone and glanced at what was in front of her. I have never seen her look so terrified. She cried and screamed, but there was nothing I could do. I literally had to watch the life be drained from Jess's face. All that was left was a pale, disfigured face staring back at me. She barely resembled the Jess I knew. As I sit here on the 7th day writing this, I am more confident now than ever that the tape I watched is actually cursed. What it's cursed by, I have no idea, but something demented lurks within that tape. It's something that no human eye should ever see. I only have a few hours left before it comes to take me, so my last words are this. Mom, Dad, and Billy, my only brother, I'm sorry, and I love you all so much. When Sarah Wyatt inherited a large sum of money from her late mother Irene, she and her husband Liam decided to buy a private farm in Austin, Texas. It was practically in the middle of nowhere, with no other houses in sight, and that's what they wanted. Sarah was mentally fatigued of the city life and needed to get away from it all. She, Liam, and their daughter, 7-year-old Melody, settled in nicely to their new home. Melody loved helping her mother feed all the animals. Sarah was beyond pleased to see her daughter getting used to her new surroundings and wanting to interact with it. The first few months went amazingly well for the Wyatt family. In their minds, buying this farm was the best decision they had ever made, both financially and personally. Then that day came, the day that would forever leave emotional scars. It was late in the evening. Sarah was guiding one of the horses back into its stable. Melody was further into the field, running around, holding her pink balloon that Liam had blown up for her earlier that day. Sarah glanced at Melody every few seconds as she guided the horse forward. As she locked the stable door, Sarah began to hear a very unusual sound. It sounded like two large scraps of metal being smashed together over and over again. Sarah fast walked out of the stable and looked ahead into the field. Her heart started pounding. She was in a state of unimaginable shock. A large structure hovered over the field. A bright light emerged from underneath, and it was shining over Melody. Sarah sprinted for her daughter's life. She screamed out Melody's name, trying to get her attention, but it was no use. Melody was captivated by the light that shined upon her face. She couldn't look away. Then, to Sarah's horror, Melody began to levitate off the ground and towards the large object in the sky. All Sarah could do was watch as her daughter ascended further and further away from her. Then all of a sudden, the large shape vanished in front of her very eyes. She collapsed to the grass, defeated. For one whole year, Sarah and Liam tried convincing whoever they could that their daughter was the victim of an alien abduction. They were not believed, and Sarah and Liam themselves were even suspected of causing harm to Melody. Sarah and Liam endured a full year of misery, praying that their daughter would come back to them. Then, on the first anniversary of Melody's abduction, something miraculous happened. Sarah was out feeding the pigs in the early hours of the morning when she glanced out into the field. She dropped a bucket of corn over her feet in disbelief. Standing in the field, holding the pink balloon, was Melody. Sarah ran to her and embraced her with love. She couldn't believe her little girl had come home. Liam and Sarah had a lot of questions, but Melody could answer none of them. It was like she couldn't remember anything beyond the day of her disappearance. The important thing was that Melody had been returned home, safe, and that's all her parents cared about. In the weeks that followed, missing children's cases skyrocketed. Sarah had a pretty good idea of what happened to them, but had no damning evidence. All she could do was hope that those kids would be returned home one day, like Melody. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. Sarah got up to get a glass of water. She drank the entire glass as she stared out her kitchen window. Something then caught Sarah's attention. A child, standing in the middle of the field. Sarah was perplexed. She then entered a state of confusion when Melody appeared 5 feet away from the little boy. She pointed out a specific place to stand, and the boy complied. Sarah started having horrific flashbacks as the familiar white light appeared from the sky. Sarah ran outside and tried to reach the boy, but by the time she was even halfway there, the light and boy were gone. Sarah put Melody back to bed. She sat in the living room and thought about what she had just seen. Sarah started crying relentlessly as she realized that Melody was helping the aliens kidnap children. That either meant Melody had been brainwashed, or Melody wasn't Melody. Sarah decided that she was going to tell the police what she saw, and of Melody's involvement. As Sarah stood up to go back upstairs, something strange started to happen. Her entire surroundings started to fade away. Everything turned to black, and she was now in a world of nothingness. Sarah thought she was losing her mind. Then in front of her, a figure started to appear. It had grey skin, big oval-shaped yellow eyes, and wore a dark green cloak. It didn't speak physical words, but did so telepathically. The last year of Sarah's life had been a lie. Melody wasn't the only person who was taken that night. Sarah and her husband had also been abducted, and had spent the last 12 months in manipulated fantasies created by this otherworldly life form. Liam and Melody were gone, both trapped in their own dark abysses. All Sarah had left was the eternal darkness that stared her in the face. Archie Bateson was never the same after his wife's death. 20 years of marriage, gone, because of a drunken teenager who decided to get behind the wheel of his car. Archie was at his restaurant designing some new menus when he received the call everyone dreads. His wife, Sandra, had been killed in a car accident. A numbness spread throughout Archie's body. He couldn't process it. Archie tried to move forward, but he just didn't see the point without Sandra by his side. Then, as it turned out, he didn't have to. Cloning had been banned worldwide in the year 2046 due to faulty clones committing acts of random violence towards their owners. Within the death of legal cloning, illegal cloning was born. Archie reached out to his former friend Lee Paisler. He had heard through the grapevine that Lee had dabbled in illegal cloning. He needed his help, Archie had fallen out with Lee 10 years prior because he had caught him selling cocaine in the men's toilets of his restaurant. Lee was arrested by police and ended up serving 7 years in prison. Archie begged Lee to help him. Lee wasn't interested in anything Archie had to say until he added another zero to the check. Archie didn't care how much it cost. He just wanted his wife back in any way he could get her. "Okay, Archie, I'll help you. But just remember, you asked for this," said Lee, with a demented look in his eye. A couple weeks passed. Archie had heard nothing back from Lee. He was starting to believe that he had been conned. As Archie poured himself a cup of fresh coffee, he was startled by a knock on his front door. When he opened it, he instantly burst into tears. Standing in front of him, clear as day, was his wife, Sandra. Archie embraced her with as much passion as he could. The love of his life had come back to him. The clone was the spitting image of Sandra. Archie was amazed by what Lee had done. The clone's personality wasn't exactly like Sandra's, but for Archie, it was close enough. For a few months, everything was seemingly going well, until it all came crashing down around Archie. He awoke from his bed on a sunny Tuesday morning. Archie got up and headed towards the bathroom. He was about to turn on the shower as he caught a glimpse of himself in the bathroom mirror. He was horrified. The white t-shirt he wore was covered in what appeared to be blood. Confusion crept in. Archie didn't understand what was going on. He didn't know whether it was his blood or someone else's. As he walked back over to the bed, he could see the handle of a knife sticking out from underneath the mattress. He dragged it out into plain sight and was scared to death as he saw it was drenched in blood. Archie didn't know what to do. He was floored by his discovery. Archie looked at footage from his home surveillance cameras. He was perplexed beyond belief when he saw himself casually walking up to his house, holding a bloodied knife. Archie had no recollection of this. He felt like he was going mad. His attention was then diverted to the TV that played in the background. Archie sat next to Sandra and watched the news closely. His face turned pale. A news reporter said that a teenage girl had been stabbed to death as she walked home from a party late the night before. Archie watched on in horror as he joined the dots in his head. In that moment, Archie's phone began to ring. He answered. His business partner Tim Litter told him that his restaurant had been burned to the ground. Archie's brain entered a grey haze. His entire life was starting to crumble around him. As we speak, I'm in the convenience store across the street, watching the surveillance. We should be able to see what happened. Archie's heart raced harder as silence engulfed Tim's end of the phone. Tim, are you there? Yes, I'm here. Well, at least I know who's responsible now, I guess. Who? Said a nervous Archie. Tim sighed before revealing the surprising culprit. You are, Archie. Why? Why would you burn your own livelihood to the ground? It makes no sense. Archie then dropped the phone in a state of shock. He felt like he was gonna pass out. Then he glanced over at Sandra. She was staring at him, with a neutral expression on her face. He looked into her eyes. Something wasn't right. Archie unexpectedly crouched down to pick his phone back up. He never intended to do this. Archie was no longer in control of himself. He dialed 911 and put the phone to his ear. He then confessed to the murder of the young girl, and that he burned down his business for the insurance money. Archie was screaming in his mind. He didn't understand what was happening. Sandra walked up to him and started smiling as her unnatural eyes pierced through his. Archie was now starting to understand. You? You're the one that's doing this? Why? Please tell me why, Sandra. I'm not Sandra. Sandra's dead, said the clone. My name is Velita, and I've been programmed to make your life a misery. Archie stood back, tears beginning to form. Lee Paisley had specifically designed this clone to make sure that Archie Bateson's life would be destroyed. Archie picked up the bloodied knife in a fit of rage. He pointed it towards the clone, as if he were going to penetrate it into its disingenuous skin. But then Archie lost control once more. His arm slowly started to rise. His eyes followed the knife as it approached his throat. The clone was Archie's puppet master, and it was controlling his strings. At this point, Archie didn't care anymore. He just wanted this hell to be over. Do it. Go ahead. Put me out of my misery. The clone granted Archie's wish. He fell to the floor, gasping for air, as blood poured from his neck. All Archie could do, as he took his last breaths, was stare up at the clone, who wore his wife's face.